All right. Let's get this started. I don't even know what day it is. Does anybody know what day it is? I've lost all sense of time. Check my streams. Yeah, that looks on. Okay. Here we go. I am tired, but I did hit my hourly goals for narrating today. So, I think I'm going to celebrate, and I'm going to do a little drink and draw junior since, we don't have the whole crew. And it's the middle of the week, and it's late. And if you're on Eastern Standard Time, I don't even want to think about what time it is. But I have this scotch that my wife got me. Oh, look, I'm just kind of waving it in front of my face. My wife got me one of those world whiskey tours for my birthday, and it's actually pretty good. I kind of got a taste for scotch late in life. Anyway, I thought I'd read and drink some more Poe this time out. I had to wear a hat because quarantine means I haven't got a haircut, and I'm starting to look like real 70s era. A few more days and I can get a mullet. It'll be good. Who have I got in here? Does this even work? Well, let's switch this. Read only to Facebook, huh? Interesting. Uh-huh. Oh, hi, Radu. How are you doing? Hey, Jen. Well, cheers. We got to get this started off, right? I'm coming to you from my new booth. I love my new booth. And the last time I was Zoom chatting, folks were complaining about my very blank door, so now it's been adorned properly with Jeff Goldblum, as all blank doors should be. If you don't have Jeff Goldblum in your booth or your small room, I suggest you rectify that because it's pretty great. So, hey, Franchina, how you doing? So, I did Mask of the Red Death last time, Mike. I was thinking this time I would do the Black Cat because it's kind of creepy. Sean, you said I'm all alone? Alone? You're right, I am alone. Because I didn't organize this one. We're organizing the real drink and draw with all 5 of us for this coming Sunday. So that all the time zones can be worked out. But I'm allowed to drink on a camera in between. The scotch is actually pretty delicious. All right. Yeah, Jen, I did. I decorated just for you. Did you see my Jeff Goldblum? He's spectacular. Hey, it's my wife. Hey, hon.
Hi. I have to go get the food and things outside.
Okay. I'm reading online.
Okay.
That was my wife, Kate. Hi, wife. All right. So we might as well get started, but I should have another drink. The cool thing about reading Poe while you're drinking is it has just got such Baroque language. If it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. I'm going to put some more, Hi, Peter. How are you? Hey, Aaron. Ah, yes. Please drink with me. We can all have alcoholic solidarity in the face of quarantine. Oh, you can stay a long time, Peter. I know you can. Just get a drink in you. All right, let's get to it. I'm going to read The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, published in 1845. Ready? You ready? We're ready. For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad am I not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many, they will seem less terrible than Baroque's. Hereafter, perhaps some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace, some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive, in the circumstances I detail with awe, nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. That's a paragraph. I think that's worth a drink. Smoke away, Peter. From my infancy I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early, and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? What disease indeed? I think that's just the word. If I say alcohol, I gotta drink. Or maybe debauch. Debauch is coming up. That's a good one, too. And at length, even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when in his fright at my violence he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me, I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder while I pen the damnable atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse, for the crime of which I had been guilty. But it was, at best, a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account, yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of man. Who has not, 100 times, found himself committing a vile or a silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination, in the teeth of our best judgment, to violate that which is law merely because we understand it to be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue, and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse at my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. On the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had there in great measure resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The words strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas-relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. I said accuracy kind of funny. Most I just wanted to sip. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, this garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by someone of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown through an open window into my chamber. This had probably been done with a view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of other wolves had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half-sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented for another pet of the same species, and of somewhat similar appearance, with which to supply its place. One night, as I sat, half stupefied in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin or of rum which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite, splotch of white covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I at once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once, and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was, its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature. A certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty prevented me from physically abusing it. I did not for some weeks strike or otherwise violently ill-use it. But gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence as from the breath of a pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast was the discovery, on the morning after I brought it home, that, like Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed, in a high degree, that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait, and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. All right, this is going on too long. I'm just drinking. The Jeff Goldblum poster says, Jeff Goldblum is watching you narrate. I was going to do Jeff Goldblum is watching you poop, but, you know, I don't really want to poop in here. Carrying on. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or, fastening its long and sharp claws in my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from so doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had, at length, assumed a rigorous. This is a long-ass sentence. I gotta go all the way back. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shuddered to name, and for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a ghastly thing, of the gallows. O mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime, of agony and of death. And now was I indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me, a man, fashioned in the image of the high God, so much of insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear, to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and nearly throwing me headlong exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe, and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal which, of course, would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal. Demoniacal? It says demoniacal. Joe is really going to appreciate this word. Demoniacal is what I'm going with. Let's redo that. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot, without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, and with entire deliberation. My glass is empty. Gonna fix it. Just a little quick repair. This is a liquor pickup. Just fixing the liquor. How y'all doing? This guy's an ass. He's an animal herder. Now where am I? Oh yeah, I got a drink. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith and with entire deliberation to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period, I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. Again, I deliberated about casting it in the well in the yard, about packing it in a box as if merchandise, with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. Have you ever noticed that Poe walls everybody up in a damn cellar? Anyway, I interrupted. Just drinking. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection caused by a false chimney or fireplace that had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the whole up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position, while, with little trouble, I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest of care. That's just minutest care. God damn it. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here at last, then, my labor has not been in vain." My next step was to look for the beast which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus, for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and the third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster, in terror, had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house, and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say, if but one word, by way of triumph, and to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house. In the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I may say an excellently well-constructed house. These walls— Are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together. And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane which I held in my hand upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the arch-fiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb, by a cry, at first muffled and broken like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony, and of the demons that exult in the damnation. Of my own thoughts, it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant, the party upon the stairs remained motionless, through extremity of terror and of awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. Ha ha! The end! Fuck yeah. Whiskey time. How y'all doing? That was enjoyable. I had a good time. I like reading Edgar Allan Poe. He's just so freaking weird. I love his weirdo language. He's just the emo boy of the 1850s? 40s? When did that dude die? This is the part where I just get drunk and ramble. Is there any other Poe that would be fun to read? I'm really not done drinking. What else we got here? This is like, where is the public domain Poe? PoeStories.com. What do we got? The Angel of the Odd, The Balloon Hoax, Berenice. That's the one where he takes her teeth out of her body. That one's creepy. The Black Cat, Cask of Amontillado, Descent into the Maelstrom, Eleonora, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Gold Bug. That's the piratey one that that's kind of like Robert Louis Stevenson did Treasure Island, kind of based on The Gold Bug, right? Hop Frog, The Imp of the Perverse, The Island of the Fae, The Man of the Crowd, who did The Mask of the Red Death last time, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. That's like the Sherlock Holmes precursor, right? That's super British. I don't know, man. The Oval Portrait, The Oblong Box, The Pit and the Pendulum, The Purloined Letter. Some Words with a Mummy? I don't remember that one at all. There's The Telltale Heart. That's a classic. You know what? The Telltale Heart might be fun. Should we do The Telltale Heart just for the shits and grins? It's kind of freaky. Yeah, you're right, Frenchie. Rue Morgue is the gorilla killer. Gorilla killer. That's what they would say. Hi, Amazon Orchid. I don't know who Amazon Orchid is, but we did The Mask of the Red Death last time. Pit and the Pendulum. Hey, Chris, how you doing? What y'all think? What should we do? Sound off. Telltale Heart? Fall of the House of Usher? Pit and the Pendulum? I just see yes, Jen. I don't know what you're saying yes to. That's really hard. I need words. Real words. What's one of your faves, Jen? Pit and the Pendulum? Okay, I'm assuming that all means Pit and the Pendulum. I've literally never read The Pit and the Pendulum. I actually hadn't read The Black Cat either, so I just knew what it was about. Franchina says Usher. Okay, so here it is. We're voting for the pit and the pendulum now. If it's pit and the pendulum, say yay. I got no yays. Telltale heart, say yay. Jennifer says telltale heart. Andrea says telltale heart. That's 2 hearts. All right, we're just going to do the telltale heart. I don't think it's not that long, right? Telltale heart's pretty short. I haven't read it since high school. Come on, telltale heart, where are you? I know you're around here somewhere. Telltale heart. That's what we're doing. But I got to top up because I really need this to go more sideways than it's been going. That actually went remarkably smooth. Which is a little unsettling when it's all about murdering animals. You don't really want that to go smooth. Kurt, there is lag. Does that mean like text lag? Or like audio lag? Yeah. The Simpsons telltale heart. Facebook sucks about streaming. So it's probably just Facebook's fault. I'm going to blame Zuckerberg. Fuck you, Zuckerberg. It's all Zuckerberg's fault. All right, we're going to do the telltale heart. Drink. All right. This one's a weird. This guy's like freaky too. He's all like itchy and twitchy and shit. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, published in 1843. True. Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all the things in heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him, and every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too, and was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased, and grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder, every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation, He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot, whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught it all. Oh, and I made an end to these labors. Oh, fuck, it's end of these labors. God damn it. I was doing pretty good. When I made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the blah 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 blah. Oh, drink! Suavity is a word that I have not yet heard. There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. Deputed? Deputed? I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale. Drank. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced Oh, we're running. Oh, now it's happening. Here we go, right off the cliff. I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what can I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no! They heard, they suspected, they knew! They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here is the beating of this hideous heart! The end. That's like Grima Wormtongue or some shit. Like Brad Dourif needs to play that character in the HBO adaptation of The Telltale Heart. That was fun. That was fun. He's a fucking weirdo. How y'all doing? I'm just gonna keep reading shit, you know? I don't have anything else to do. I got my hours in for the day. Hey, Mike. All right. What are we gonna do now? The Pit and the Pendulum? We're just gonna go through the fucking over. I don't know how to say that word. Over. I'd look it up on Merriam-Webster, but I'm lazy. We could read The Fall of the House of Usher, the sad, creepy house being decrepit. We could read The Cask of... We've read enough walled up people, right? We don't need to read The Cask of Amontillado. That's just more walled up people. What if you read Jane Austen for a flip? Jane Austen what? What Jane Austen would we read? Do we have a short Jane Austen? Is there like a Jane Austen short story that's like super readable? I'm all about like the short stories that you can just like dash off and you get done. And it's pretty cool. And Poe's like the only one that I find that's like not totally impenetrable or filled with really creepy like racial crap. We could read, I've literally never read The Pit and the Pendulum. I think I've seen the Vincent Price movie. Wasn't that the other one that somebody wanted to do, The Pit and the Pendulum? How long is The Pit and the Pendulum? I'm looking. Beatrix Potter. It's all about bunnies. Oh my God, The Pit and the Pendulum's long. Should we try The Pit and the Pendulum? If somebody posts some other thing that you want read in the chat right now, I'll just read that. I don't even care. It can be anything. If you've got a short story that you wrote in high school and you happen to have it in a document that you can email to me in about 35 seconds, I'll do that. But otherwise, I guess I'll do The Pit and the Pendulum. The Raven, that's a poem, though. You think we should do poems? I mean, I can do The Raven. I got it right here. This has got the poetry link. Link. You want to do The Raven? All right, Jen, we're doing The Raven. Somebody said something, so we're doing The Raven. When Beatrix Potter's short comes back, I'm reading that, though. Because if bunnies happen after this, it'd be pretty spectacular. Drunk bunnies. Oh, no, you don't want those. What, The Raven? Poems? We're doing a poem. Here it goes. I'm going to drink ahead of time. I got The Raven up. It's happening. Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption. That's like 4 hours, man. 3 hours? That's longer than it seems like it would be. Link, link, link. Somebody's giving me a link. Hey, Abe. How you doing? I haven't seen you literally since high school. It's very nice to see you on Facebook in the chat. All right, here we go. The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Published in 1845. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, but nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my bucks. Bucks? It's books, not bucks. God damn it. All right, drinking. I have to start the whole paragraph, though. Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my book surcease a sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore. From... Damn it. This is going to be harder than all the others. But I'm going to start on the last sentence of this paragraph. For the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now to still the beating of my heart I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into the darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard it tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is someone at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched upon my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little mean. Oh, God damn it. There's nothing in here. Shit. Thanks, Jeff. Now I gotta remember where I am. Yeah. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly. Plainly? Plainly is not a word. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above its chamber door. Its chamber door? His chamber door. All right. This is the part where we go like this. All right. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further then he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, Doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast, followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking, what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, Nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseed censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, Oh, I got a drink bubble there. Oh my Jesus. Ah. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if, within the distant Aden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Be that word or sign in parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. The end! All right, y'all. I can pretty much do this forever. This is fucking freaking a blast. Oh my God. What would be good now? As long as people haven't just wandered off. And I can just keep drinking and reading and shit. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. How long is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman? I'm going to find out. Yellow Wallpaper, Charlotte Perkins Gilman. They say smoldering with a U. Oh my. I don't know. Oh, okay. Now I have an idea. Bear with me. What about The Monkey's Paw? Since we're doing creepy ass shit. A random poem book, The Coming of the Plague, from you would do The Plague. Does it have boobs in it, Franchina? Because that would like make it like a Franchina hat trick. No, that's a poem. That's a shorty. That's a shorty. Use for the win. Ah. All right, Franchina, you really want to read The Coming of the Plague? Because that won't take but like 5 seconds. I'm going to try not to write The Coming of the Plaque. But, oh man, I just tried to scroll my actual monitor. That's really dumb. With my finger. Weldon Keys. The Coming of the Plague by Weldon Keys. It's short. I'm doing it. And I'm drinking beforehand. This is actually not a bad scotch. All right, just for you, Mike fucking Franchina. The Coming of the Plague by Weldon Keys. September was when it began. Locusts dying in the fields, our dogs silent, moving like shadows on a wall, and strange worms crawling, flies of a kind we had never seen before, huge vineyard moths, badgers and snakes abandoning their holes in the field, their fruit gone rotten. Queer fungi sprouting, the fields and woods covered with spider webs, black vapors rising from the earth. All these and more began that fall. Ravens flew round the hospital in pairs. Where there was water, we could hear the sound of beating clothes all through the night. We could not count all the miscarriages, the quarrels, the jealousies. And one day in a field I saw a swarm of frogs, swollen and hideous, hundreds upon hundreds, sitting on each other, huddled together, silent, ominous, and heard the sound of rushing wind. Is there more to this? Because I feel like there is. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag... Oh, no, this is like a this is Ralph Waldo Emerson. It said continue, but yeah. Yeah, it just went to another poem. I'm not going to read that one. Fuck you, Ralph Waldo Emerson. All right, what are we doing now? I need some shit to do. I am fat and sassy, I'm drunk, and I just want to read some shit. All right, what are we doing? What are we doing? Are we doing more Poe? Are we doing something weird? Are we doing like the start of Treasure Island? Are we doing Fox and Socks? Fox and Socks? You mean like Dr. Seuss, Fox and Socks? Socks on Fox? Isn't that Winnie the Pooh? Winnie the Pooh? Is Winnie the Pooh in the public domain? That's the real question. Dr. Seuss is totally not in the public domain. I'm sure his family has the proverbial chastity belt on that baby. A.A. Milne and Winnie the Pooh might be, but I don't know. What's all right, come on. Monkey's Paw, right? Monkey's Paw? Monkey's Paw. Everybody loves the monkey's paw, right? Twilight? I'm really sure that one's not in the public domain. I don't want to get sued by whoever wrote Twilight, which I don't know. Come on, monkey's paw. Where are you? I see a monkey from Jen, so that's what we're doing. Monkey's paw it is. Without, the night was cold and wet, but in the small parlor of Laburnum Villa, I didn't make it through the first sentence. Laburnum Villa. This is going to be long. I apologize in advance. Without, the night was cold and wet, but in the small parlor of Laburnum Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were at chess. The former, who possessed ideas about the game involving radical changes, putting his king into such sharp and unnecessary perils that it even provoked comment from the white-haired old lady knitting placidly by the fire. "Hark at the wind!" said Mr. White, who, having seen a fatal mistake after it was too late, was amiably desirous of preventing his son from seeing it. "I'm listening," said the latter, grimly surveying the board as he stretched out his hand. "Check! I should hardly think that he'd come tonight," said his father, with his hand poised over the board. "Mate," replied the son. "That's the worst of living so far out," God damn. All right, I got a drink now. You know, I really feel like I started off on the wrong foot with these accents. I just went all over the place because I'm drunk. So I'm actually feeling like I'm going to start over and try and get this into a better place so that I don't have alcohol poisoning by the time this is over. We're starting from the top. Without, the night was cold and wet, but in the small parlor of Laburnum Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were at chess, the former, who possessed ideas about the game involving radical changes, putting his king into such sharp and unnecessary perils that even provoked Wow. Didn't make it through the sentence. This might be a real short read. Father and son were at chess, the former, who possessed ideas about the game involving radical changes, putting his king into such sharp and unnecessary perils that it even provoked comment from the white-haired old lady knitting placidly by the fire. "Hark at the wind," said Mr. White, who, having seen a fatal mistake after it was too late, was amiably desirous of preventing his son from seeing it. "I'm listening," said the latter, grimly surveying the board as he stretched out his hand. "Check! I should hardly think that he'd come tonight," said his father, with his hand poised over the board. "Mate," replied the son. "That's the worst of living so far out," bawled Mr. White, with sudden and unlooked-for violence. "Of all the beastly, slushy, out-of-the-way places to live in, this is the worst. Pathway's a bog, and the road's a torrent. I don't know what people are thinking about. I suppose because only 2 houses on the road are let, they think it doesn't matter." "Never mind, dear," said his wife, soothingly. "Perhaps you'll win the next one." Mr. White looked up sharply, just in time to intercept a knowing glance between mother and son. The words died away on his lips, and he hid a guilty grin in his thin gray beard. "There he is," said Herbert White, as the gate banged to loud... Has a gate banged too? Gate banged too? "There he is," said Herbert White, as the gate banged too loudly and heavy footsteps came toward the door. Ooh, I had a tummy gurgle. You got to hear it. It's good stuff. The old man rose with hospitable haste, and opening the door was heard condoling with the new arrival. The new arrival also condoled with himself, so that Mrs. White said, "Tut, tut," and coughed gently as her husband entered the room, followed by a tall, burly man, beady of eye and rubicund of visage. visage. "Sergeant Major Morris," he said, introducing him. The sergeant major shook hands and, taking the proffered seat by the fire, watched contentedly while his host got out whiskey and tumblers and stood a small copper kettle on the fire. At the third glass, his eyes got brighter, and he began to talk. I gotta start over, don't I? God damn it. I just drank. At the third glass, his eyes got brighter, and he began to talk, the little family circling Oh no, this was a terrible mistake. At the third glass, his eyes got brighter, and he began to talk, the little family circle regarding with eager interest this visitor from distant parts as he squared his broad shoulders in the chair and spoke of wild scenes and doughty deeds, of wars and plagues and strange peoples. 21 years of it, said Mr. White, nodding at his wife and son. When he went away, he was a slip of a youth in the warehouse. Now look at him. He don't have to look. Oh, no. Oh, no. I chose very poorly. This story is very long and requires actually paying attention. He don't look to have taken much harm, said Mrs. White, politely. I'd like to go to India myself, said the old man. Just look around a bit, you know. Better where you are, said the sergeant major, shaking his head. He put down the empty glass and, sighing softly, shook it again. I should like to see the old temples and fakirs and jugglers, said the old man. What was that you started telling me the other day about a monkey's paw or something, Morris? Nothing, said the soldier, hastily. Leastways nothing worth hearing. Monkey's paw, said Mrs. White, curiously. Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, perhaps, said the sergeant major, offhandedly. His three listeners leaned forward eagerly. The visitor absent-mindedly put his empty glass to his lips and then set it down again. His host filled it for him. To look at, said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket. It's just an ordinary little paw, dried to a mummy. He took something out of his pocket and proffered it. Mrs. White drew back with a grimace, but her son, taking it, examined it curiously. And what is there special about it? Inquired Mr. Oh, wrong damn voice. Didn't read it well. Oh, that's Mr. White, not Mrs. White. Shit. This was a very bad mistake. And what is there special about it? Inquired Mr. White, as he took it from his son and, having examined it, placed it upon the table. It had a spell put on it by an old fakir, said the sergeant major. A very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow. He put a spell on it so that 3 separate men could each have 3 wishes from it. His manner was so impressive that he... I died. Someone just killed me. All right. God, there's no way I'm getting through this story. Somebody save me. Suggest something else. Anything else. Because there's no way I'm getting through this. His manner was so impressive that his hearers were conscious that their light laughter jarred somewhat. Well, why don't you have 3, sir? Said Herbert White, cleverly. The soldier regarded him in the way that middle age is wont to regard presumptuous youth. I have, he said, quietly, and his blotchy face whitened. And did you really have the 3 wishes granted? Asked Mrs. White. I did, said the sergeant major, and his glass tapped against his strong teeth. Oh, Mike is suggesting something. Young Goodman Brown. Okay, so how long is young Goodman Brown? Because I want to pull the ripcord on this goddamn thing. There's like 8 million more pages, and I'm a little drunk. So, Young Goodman Brown. I'm looking it up. Young Goodman Brown. I'm clicking on Mike Franchina's link. Franchina, that's like 400 pages long. That's like 400 pages long. That's not shorter than The Monkey's Paw. God damn it. All right. I guess I have to keep going with The Monkey's Paw. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's 10 pages long. You're like having your estimation, Mike. Jesus. All right. How much more monkeys? You know, they stopped talking here pretty quick on The Monkey's Paw. Okay, I'm gonna roll on. I'm gonna try. And has anybody else wished? Persisted the old lady. The first man had his 3 wishes. Yes, was the reply. I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third was for death. That's how I got the paw. His tones were so grave that a hush fell upon the group. If you had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now then, Morris, said the old man at last. What do you keep it for? The soldier shook his head. Fancy, I suppose, he said, slowly. I did have some idea of selling it, but I don't think I will. It has caused enough mischief already. Besides, people won't buy. They think it's a fairy tale, some of them, and those who do think anything of it want to try it first and pay me afterward. If you could have another 3 wishes, said the old man, eyeing him keenly, would you have them? I don't know, said the other. I don't know. He took the paw and, dangling it between his forefinger and thumb, suddenly threw it upon the fire. White, with a slight cry, stooped down and snatched it off. Better let it burn, said the soldier, solemnly. If you don't want it, Morris, said the other, give it to me. I won't, said his friend, doggedly. I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it on the fire again like a sensible man. The other... All right, Jen, you're doing a thing. I'm looking at it. Fairy tales of Hans... This is like 8,000 fairy tales. Which fairy tale are you talking about, Jen? Because this is very daunting for someone who is hooted out of their brain. All right, I'm going back to the paw till I hear otherwise. He took the paw. Oh, no, better let it burn. I won't, said his friend doggedly. I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it on the fire again like a sensible man. The other shook his head and examined his new possession closely. How do you do it? He inquired. Hold it in your right hand and wish aloud, said the sergeant major. But I warn you of the consequences. Sounds like the Arabian Nights, said Mrs. White, as she rose and began to set the supper. Don't you think you might wish for 4 pairs of hands for me? Her husband drew the talisman from pocket, and then all 3 burst into laughter as the sergeant major, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm. If you must wish, he said gruffly, wish for something sensible. Mr. White dropped it back in his pocket and, placing chairs, motioned his friend to the table. In the business of supper, the talisman was partly forgotten, and afterward the 3 sat listening in an enthralled fashion to a second installment of the soldier's adventures in India. If the tale about the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those... Oh, who's Herbert? I don't know who's Herbert. I'm like a quarter of the way through the story, and I don't even know who Herbert is. This is a disaster. A disaster. Is Herbert the kid? Mr. White is the grown-up, and Herbert is the kid. All right. We're trying. We're trying. I'm not even close to almost done. Not even close. If the tale about the monkey's paw is not more than truthful than those... I couldn't even get that right. I'm not even drinking for that. If the tale about the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those he has been telling us, said Herbert, as the door closed behind their guest, just in time to catch the last train, we shan't make much out of it. Did you give anything? Oh no. This is so bad. This is so bad. All right, what am I going to do? You know what? I will try the monkey's paw at a later date because, oh my God, I'm gonna die. I can't pre-read enough in my current inebriated state to mark any of the dialogue changes. So I'm basically just going to get poisoned. All right, so here's what we're going to do. In order to get at least, we want to end on like a good note, right? Good note. Good note. I'm going back through all this shit. We are going to read either The Pit and the Pendulum or The Fall of the House of Usher. What do you think? Whoever says something first, that's the one. Pit and the Pendulum. Fall of the House of Usher. Somebody say something. I'm waiting. It's going to happen. Come on. Come on. Pit and the Pendulum. Follow the House of Usher. I just need one. Tell me. Pit! Pit! Pit it is. Pit it is. All right. Pit and the Pendulum. We're getting back into some fucking Poe. It starts with Latin. God damn it. Oh no. Impia tortorum longos hic turba furores? All right, we'll see how this goes. All right. The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe, published 1850. He's getting on. Impia tortorum longos hic turba furores, sanguinis innocui nono satiata aluit. Sospite nunc patria fracto nunc funeres antro, mors ubi dira fuit vita salusque fatint. Quatrain composed for the gates of a market to be erected upon the site of the Jacobin clubhouse at Paris. I was sick unto death with that long agony, and when they at length unbound me and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sentence of death, was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. After that, the sound of the inquisitorial voices seemed merged in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of a meal wheel. Meal wheel? Mill wheel. God damn. All right. Meal wheel. It sounded like something that's on the back of a Wheaties box. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution. God damn it. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do it. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of a mill wheel. This only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more. Yet for a while I saw, but with how terrible an exaggeration. I saw the lips of the black-robed judges. They appeared to me whiter than the sheet upon which I traced these words, and thin even to grotesqueness, thin with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw that the decrees of what to me was fate were still issuing from those lips. I saw them writhe with a deadly locution. I saw them fashion the syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound succeeded. I saw, too, for a few moments of delirious horror, the soft and nearly imperceptible waving of the sable draperies which enwrapped the walls of the apartment. And then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first, they wore the aspect of charity, and seemed white and slender angels who would save me. But then, all at once, there came a most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fiber in my frame thrill as if I had touched the wire of a galvanic battery, while the angel forms became meaningless specters with heads of flame, and I saw that from them there would be no help. And then there stole into my fancy, like a rich musical note, the thought of what sweet rest there must be in the grave. The thought came gently and stealthily, and it seemed long before it attained full appreciation. But just as my spirit came at length properly to feel and entertain it, the figures of the judges vanished as if magically from before me. The tall candles sank into nothingness. Their flames went out utterly. The blackness of darkness supervened. All sensations appeared swallowed up in a mad, rushing descent as of the soul into Hades. Then silence and stillness. Night were the universe. I had swooned, but still will not say that all of consciousness was lost. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define or even to describe. Yet all was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no, in delirium, no, in swoon, no, in death, no, even in the grave, all is not lost, else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from the most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream. Yet in a second afterward, so frail may that web have been, we remember not that we have dreamed. In the return to life from the swoon there are 2 stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical, existence. It seems probable that if, upon reaching the second stage, we could recall the impressions of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent in memories of the gulf beyond. And that gulf is... what? How at motherfucker. I'm so not sober. I'm not sober. I don't have any water. Fuck, that's empty. God damn it. All right. This is totally gonna be the last thingy. If I can make it through the fall of the... No, this is the Pit and the Pendulum. I don't even know what we're reading. Literally, that's how ruined I am. Save me, Jeff. Save me, Jeff. I love the new booth. It's fucking amazing. Having 6 inches more space in either direction is like, I can't even describe how amazing that is. And also it has a desk built in so I don't bang my legs on the desk legs. It's spectacular. And I have Jeff to accompany me as my friend. All right. I don't even know what I was reading. I'm just going to guess. Yet in a second afterward, so frail may that web have been, we remember not that we have dreamed. In the return to life from the swoon there are 2 stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical, existence. It seems probable that if, upon reaching the second stage, we could recall the impressions of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent in memories of the gulf beyond, and that gulf is... what? How at least shall we distinguish its shadows from those of the tomb? But if the impressions of what I have termed the first stage are not at will recalled yet, after a long interval, do they not come unbidden, while we marvel whence they come? He who has never swooned, is not he who finds strange palaces and wildly familiar faces in coals that glow, is not he who beholds floating in midair the sad visions that the many may not view, is not he who ponders over the perfume of some novel flower, is not he whose brain grows bewildered with the meaning of some musical cadence which has never before arrested his attention. Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amid earnest struggles to regather some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there had been moments when I have dreamed of success. There have been brief, very brief, oh shit, I read up a line. Damn it. Fuck. This is totes the last story. Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amid earnest struggles to regather some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there have been moments when I had dreamed of success. There have been brief, very brief periods when I have conjured up remembrances which the lucid season of a later epoch assures me could have had reference only to that condition of seeming unconsciousness. I literally have no idea what he just said. These shadows of memory tell indistinctly of tall figures that lifted and bore me in silence down, down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppressed me at the mere idea of the interminableness of the descent. They tell also of a vague horror at my heart on account of that heart's unnatural stillness. There comes a sense of sudden motionlessness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly train, had outrun in their descent the limits of those... the limitness. Fuck. No. All right, we're doing it. It's the rules, and I'm sticking to it. Then comes a sense of sudden motionlessness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly train, had outrun, in their descent, the limits of the limitless and paused from the wearisomeness of their toil. After this I call to mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness, the madness of a memory which busies itself among forbidden things. Very suddenly there came back to my soul motion and sound, the tumultuous motion of the heart, and in my ears the sound of its beating. Then a pause in which all is blank. Then again sound and motion and touch, a tingling sensation pervading my frame. Then the mere consciousness of existence without thought, a condition which lasted long. Then, very suddenly, thought and shuddering terror, an earnest endeavor to comprehend my true state, then a strong desire to lapse into insensibility, then a rushing revival of soul and a successful effort to move, and now a full memory of the trial, of the judges, of the sable draperies, of the sentence, of the sickness, of the swoon. Then entire forgetfulness of all that followed, of all that a later day and much earnestness of endeavor have endeavored me Oh my God. Oh no. Oh. Okay, all right, I promised. Fuck. I need some water. For the next one of these, I'm bringing fucking chips. Chips! Chelsea Stevens knows what I'm talking about. Then entire forgetfulness, motherfucker. I'm getting more foul-mouthed the farther. I was kind of checking my foul-mouthedness early on. But now I don't know what to do. And there's no way I'm going upstairs to get popcorn and chips. That would just leave you all hanging, and I'd have 0 viewers when I came back down, and then it would be sad and drunk alone. All right. Then entire forgetfulness of all that followed, of all that a later day and much earnestness of endeavor have enabled me vaguely to recall. So far I had not opened my eyes. I felt that I lay upon my back, unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. Then I suffered it to remain for many minutes while I strove to imagine where and what it could be. I longed, yet dared not, to employ my vision. I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but that I grew aghast lest there should be nothing to see. At length,
With a wild desperation at heart, I quickly unclosed my eyes. My worst thoughts then were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled for breath. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly and made effort to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings and attempted from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet not for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a supposition, notwithstanding what we read in fiction, is altogether in fucking motherfucker. Such a supposition, notwithstanding what we read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with real existence. But where and in what state was I? The condemned to death I knew perished unusually at the autos da fe, and one of these had been held on the very night of the day of my trial. Had I been remanded to my dungeon to wait? Wait. Motherfuck. I hope you are all drinking with me, otherwise this is super sad. Had I been remanded to my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months? This I at once saw could not be. Victims had been in immediate demand. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as all the condemned cells at Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether excluded. A fearful idea now suddenly drove the blood in torrents upon my heart, and for a brief period I once more relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet, trembling convulsively in every fiber. I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step, lest I should be impeded by the walls of a tomb. Perspiration burst from every pore and stood in cold, big beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew at length intolerable, and I cautiously moved forward with my arms extended and my eyes straining from their sockets in the hope of catching some faint ray of light. I proceeded for many paces, but still all was blackness and vacancy. I breathed more deeply. It seemed evident that mine was not, at least, the most hideous of fates. And now, as I still continued to step cautiously onward, there came thronging upon my recollection 1,000 vague rumors of the horrors of Toledo. Of the dungeons there had been strange things narrated, fables I had always deemed them, but yet strange and too ghastly to repeat, save in a whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in this subterranean world of darkness, or what fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death of more than customary bitterness, I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. My outstretched hands at length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall, seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, smiley, slimy. Fuck you, motherfucking slimy. Edgar Allan Poe, you are a son of a bitch. Oh, God damn it. Here we go. St. Jeff. Give me strength. All right. All right. We're continuing onward. My outstretched hands at length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall, seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all the careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means of ascertaining the dimensions of my dungeon, as I might make its circuit and return to the point whence I set out without being aware of the fact, so perfectly uniform seemed the wall. I therefore sought the knife which had been in my pocket, which... Fuck. All right. I therefore sought the knife which had been in my pocket when led into the inquisitorial chamber. But it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of coarse serge. Serge? 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 S-E-R-G-E? I'm going to say serge. I'm going to pretend that I said it right. I had thought of forcing the blade in some minute crevice of the masonry so as to identify my point of departure. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial, although in the disorder of my fancy it seemed at first insuperable. I tore a part of the hem from the robe and placed the fragment at full length and at right angles to the wall. In groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit. So, at least I thought, but I had not accounted upon the extent of the dungeon or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. That was a hiccup. Do I have to drink for a hiccup? I don't have to drink for a hiccup. Take pity on me. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time when I stumbled and fell. My excessive fatigue induced me to remain prostrate, and sleep soon overtook me as I lay. Upon waking... It's awaking, not waking. I can't get by on that one. That's not a burp. Upon awaking, I stretched... Oh, it's Anne stretching. This is bad. Upon awaking and stretching forth an arm, I found beside me a loaf and a pitcher with water. I was too much exhausted to reflect upon this circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterward, I resumed my tour around the prison, and with much toil came at last upon the fragment of the serge. Up to the period when I fell, I had counted 52 paces, and upon resuming my walk, I had counted 48 more. When I arrived at the rag, there were in all, then, 100 paces, and admitting 2 paces to the yard, I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in circuit. I had met, however, with many angles in the wall, and thus I could form no guess at the shape of the vault, for vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object, certainly no hope these researches, but a vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. At first, I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly of solid material, was treacherous with slime. Treacherous with slime. Hey, Chris, you have no faith that I can make it through this? You don't think I can... You don't think I can make it through this? You're probably right. At first, I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly of solid material, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in as direct a line as possible. I had advanced some 10 or 12 paces in this manner when the remnant of the torn hem of my robe became entangled between my legs. I stepped on it and fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend what somewhat startling circumstances, which yet, in a few seconds afterward, and while I still lay prostrate, arrested my attention. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips and the upper portion of my head, although seemingly at a less elevation than the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm and shuddered to find that I had fallen at the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent, of course, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds, I hearkened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm in its descent. At length there was a sullen plunge into water, succeeded by loud echoes. At the same moment there came a sound resembling the quick opening and as rapid closing of a door overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom and as suddenly faded away. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped. Another step before my fall, and the world had seen me no more, and the death just avoided was of that very character which I had regarded as fabulous and frivolous in the tales respecting the Inquisition. To the victim of its tyranny, there was the choice of death with its direst physical agonies, or death with its most hideous moral horrors. I had been reserved for the latter. By long suffering, my nerves had been unstrung until I trembled at the sound of my own voice and had become in every respect a fitting subject for the species of torture which awaited me. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall, resolving there to perish rather than risk the terrors of the wells, of which my imagination now pictured many in various positions about the dungeon. In other conditions of mind, I might have had courage to end my misery at once by a plunge into one of these abysses. But now I was the veriest of cowards. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Agitation of spirit kept me away. Damn it. I keep wanting to do a punch-in and fix my previous read because of audiobooks. So I keep reaching for my Razer, little mini keyboard, but that doesn't actually work. I just have to keep reading and get even more and more fucked. Agitation of spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered. Upon arousing, I found by my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. I must have been drugged, for scarcely had I drunk before I became irresistibly drowsy. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long I lasted, of course, I know not, but when once again I unclosed my eyes, the objects around me were visible. By a wild, sulphurous luster, the origin of which I could not at first determine, I was enabled to see the extent and aspect of my prison. It's of the prison. We're reading The Pit and the Pendulum right now. If you roll back, we've been through a few things, so, feel free to recollect later when I'm slightly less drunk. Omau 77. All right. By a wild, sulphurous luster, the origin of which I could not at first determine, I was enabled to see the extent and aspect of the prison. In its size, I had been greatly mistaken. The whole circuit of its walls did not exceed 25 yards. For some minutes this fact occasioned me a world of vain trouble, vain indeed, for what could be of less importance under the terrible circumstances which envisioned me than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? But my soul took a wild interest in trifles, and I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurement. The truth at length flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I had counted 52 paces up to the period when I fell. I must then have been within a pace or two of the fragment of surge. In fact, I had nearly performed the circuit of the vault. I then slept, and upon waking, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing the circuit nearly double what it actually was. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began my tour with the wall upon the... Fuck! There is no God, only Zool. Yeah, Chad, I ain't tasting shit. I'm just trying to survive until the end of this goddamn story. Fuck you, EA Poe. All right. I don't even know where I am. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began my tour with the wall to the left and ended it with the wall to the right. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure. In feeling my way, I had found many angles. Oh my God. Oh my Lord. Kill me now. All right. I'm very sad. I should have really just done one book, because this... Holy shit, dude. Scotch does not... There's like a quarter of a bottle in this goddamn thing. I opened it yesterday. What the fuck? All right. Come on, EAP. We're gonna make it to the end of this goddamn story. My wife's probably asleep. She's like, fuck you. You're being an asshole. No, Chad. We are finishing whatever this story is that we are reading, which I literally have forgotten. Oh no, it's The Pit and the Pendulum. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape and the, fuck. My scotch is on the floor. I don't know where your scotch is. Oma was 77. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure. In feeling my way, I had found many angles, and thus deduced an idea of great irregularity. So potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing from lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions, or niches, or odd intervals. The general shape of the prison was square. What I had taken for masonry seemed now to be iron or some other metal in huge plates whose sutures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all the hideous and repulsive devices to which the charnel superstition of the monks has given rise. The figures of fiends and aspects of menace with skeletal forms and other more really fearful... Fuck you, EAP. Oh my God. Hey, Chad. The new studio is amazing, and I took carpet remnants from our new house, and I put them in the bottom, and they are fabulous, because now I have little socky feet, and it's great. Slurring totally counts, according to me, at this point in the read. Are you not entertained? This is where you pull up the fucking gladiator memes, right? Are you not entertained? I really want to finish this story. I'm only halfway through. God damn it. All right, I'm muscling my way through this shit. Fucking Edgar Allan Poe. Get to the pendulum already. We've had enough pit. All right, Zen time. Patron saint, Jeff Goldblum, give me strength. The angles were simply those of a Fuck, that's not even the sentence I'm supposed to start on, am I? I'm not drinking. I'm just figuring out which sentence I'm at. I would... Oh, no, I'm supposed to be the general shape of the prison was square. Yeah, I don't have to drink. I was just doing an exploratory test. I'm gonna eat so many chips after this, you just don't even fucking know. Just fistfuls of cheese out of the shredded cheese bag. I'm just gonna be down in that shit. The general shape of the prison was square. What I had taken for masonry seemed now to be iron or some other metal in huge plates whose sutures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all the hideous and repulsive devices to which the charnel superstition of the monks has given rise. The figures of fiends and aspects of menace, with skeletal forms and other more really fearful images, overspread and disfigured the walls. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but that the colors seemed faded and blurred as if from the effects of a damp atmosphere. I noticed the floor, too, which was of stone, and the center yawned the circular pit from whose jaws I had escaped, but it was the only one in the dungeon. All this I saw indistinctly and by much effort, for my personal condition had been greatly changed during slumber. I now lay upon my back and at full length on a species of low framework of wood. To this I was securely bound by a long strap resembling a surcingle. I really hope that's how you pronounce surcingle, but honestly I don't fucking care. It passed in many convolutions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head, and at my left arm to such extent that I could, by dint of much exertion, supply myself with food from an earthen dish which lay by my side upon the floor. I saw, to my horror, that the pitcher had been removed. I say, to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst it appeared to be the design of my persecutors to stimulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. Looking upward, I surveyed this... Fuck. This is bad. How much more do I have to... This is bad. This is bad. My idea of getting done is dimming. Jeff, you're letting me down. You're letting me down so hard. Chips and cheese is really what needs to happen. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead and constructed much as the side walls. In one of its panels, a very singular figure riveted my whole attention. It was the painted figure of Time, as he is commonly represented, save that, in lieu of a scythe, he held what, at a casual glance, I supposed to be the pictured image of a huge pendulum, such as we see on antique clocks. There was something, however, in the appearance of this machine which caused me to regard it more attentively. While I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own, I fancied that I saw it in motion. In an instant afterward, the fancy was confirmed. Its sweep was brief. Its sweep was brief. Its sweep was brief. Sweep was brief. Fucking motherfucking. Its sweep was brief, and of course slow. I watched it for some minutes, somewhat in fear but more in wonder. Wearied at length with observing its dull movement, I turned my eyes upon the other objects in the cell. A slight noise attracted my notice, and looking to the floor I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the well which lay just within view to my right. Even then, while I gazed, they came up in troops, hurriedly, with ravenous eyes, allured by the scent of the meat. From this it required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time, before I cast Son of a bitch. I just want you to remember, I made it through the Black Cat pretty unobstructed, but this is some fucking shit. Words have lost all meaning, Amazon Orchid. I wish I knew who Amazon Orchid was. My bed is calling, but we're 2/3 of the way through the pit and the pendulum. It's not like I'm going to pick this up later. All right, one more sip. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of the time, before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that had imperceptibly descended. Fuck. Good night, Abe. Good to see you again. I hope you're doing great, and I hope you're safe and well. Amazon Orchid. Could I guess? Amazon Orchid. You just talked to me yesterday about codes on ACX and how they weren't useful anymore. Is that right, Amazon Orchid? Have I identified who you are? Angel. I'm just waiting to see, because I need a moment for equilibrium before I try and read anything else. Hi, Tiffany. You could totally do this sober. I'm a low bar to clear right now. That's what I am. God, how long has this stream been going on? I don't even know. I've lost all sense of time. I just drank myself into oblivion. Anyway, here we go. I have to read one-eyed now, because otherwise I can't focus on it. That's how you know this is going well. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time, before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that had perceptibly descended. I now observed, with what horror it is needless to say, that its nether extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel about a foot in length from horn to horn, the horns upward, and the under edge evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor also, it seemed massy and heavy, tapering from the edge into a solid and broad structure above. It was appendage to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by monkish ingenuity and torture. My cognizance? It has been a while. Hi, Amazon Orchid. I guessed wrong. I don't know who you are. I'm so sad. I'll figure it out later, when I'm not fucked. And more fucked. My cognizance of the pit had become known to the inquisitorial agents, the pit whose horrors had been destined for so bold a recusant as myself, the pit typical of hell and regarded by rumor as the ultima thule of all their punishments. The plunge into this pit I had avoided by the merest of accidents. I knew that surprise or entrapment into torment formed an important portion of all the grotesquerie of these dungeon deaths. having failed to fall, it was no part of the demon plan to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, there being no alternative, a different and a milder destruction awaited me. Milder. I half smiled in my agony as I thought of such application of such a term. What boots it to tell of the long, long hours of horror more than mortal, during which I counted the rushing vibrations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with a descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages. Down and still down it came. Days passed. It might have been that many days passed ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its acrid breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. My fridge is upstairs, Mike Franchina. It's far away. It's far from the liquor. If I go up there, it'll take like 20 minutes, and I'll get lost, and I'll have to go to the bathroom, and then it's just fucking all over. So I'm going to keep rolling, and after this, I'm going to go eat a fuck ton of cheese. Just fistfuls of shredded cheese. I prayed. I wearied heaven with my prayer for its more speedy descent. I grew frantically... Oh, this is so fucked. This was a terrible idea. This is very bad. I'm really just sipping now, but trust me, it's really fucking me up. I grew frantically mad and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I fell suddenly calm and lay smiling at the glittering death as a child at some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was brief, for, upon again lapsing into life, there had been no perceptible descent in the pendulum. That's a burp. I'm not even stopping for that anymore. I'm just too fucked. But it might have been all along. But it might have been long. But it might have been all along. But it might have been along. I don't even care. I'm not drinking anymore or I'm going to die. For I knew there were demons who took note of my swoon and who could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very... inexpressibly sick and weak, as if through long initiation. Inanition? Is inanition an actual word? Inanition? That's not a fucking word. Inanition. Fuck you, Edgar Allan Poe. All right, fucking inanition. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very, inexpressibly sick and weak, as if through long inanition. Even amid the agonies of that period, the human nature craved food. With painful effort, I outstretched my left hand as far as my bonds permitted, and took possession of the small remnant which had been spared me by the rats. As I put a portion of it within my lips, there rushed to my mind a half-formed thought of joy, of hope. Yet, what business had I with hope? I was, as I say, a half-formed thought. Man has many such which are never completed. I felt that it was of a joy. Fuck. I'm hitting the drunk part where I can't, read ahead. And then everything goes to shit. All right. My liver died. And now we finish. I felt that it was of joy, of hope, but felt also that it had perished in its formation. In vain I struggled to regain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulum was at right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of the heart. It would fray the serge of my robe. It would return and repeat its operations again and again. Notwithstanding terrifically wide sweep, some 30 feet or more, and the hissing vigor of its descent, sufficient to sunder these very walls of iron, still the fraying of my robe would be all that, for several minutes, it would accomplish. And at this thought, I paused. I dared not go farther than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with a pertinacity of attention, as if, in so dwelling, I could arrest here the descent of the steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the peculiar thrilling transcends. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. It's thrilling, not trilling. I want to die. Kill me. This is that part in Alien where he just begs Ripley to burn him to death. That's where I am right now. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the peculiar thrilling sensation which the friction of cloth produces on the nerves. I pondered upon all this frivolity until my teeth were on edge. Down, steadily down, I crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in contrasting its downward with its lateral velocity, to the right, to the left, far and wide, with a shriek of a damned spirit, to the heart with the stealthy pace of the tiger. I alternately laughed and howled as the one or the other idea grew predominant. Down. Certainly, relentlessly down. It vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the latter from the platter beside me to my mouth with great effort, but no farther. Could I have broken the fastenings above the elbow, I would have seized and attempted to arrest the pendulum. I might as well have attempted to arrest an avalanche. Down, still seemingly, still inevitably down. I gasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its every sweep. My eyes followed its outward or upward whirls with the eagerness of the most unnerving despair. They closed themselves Okay, you say spasmodically. Spaz-fucking-modically. This is really sad. Okay. They closed themselves spasmodically at the descent, although death would have been a relief. Oh, how unspeakable. Still, I quivered in every nerve to think how slight a sinking of the machinery would precipitate that keen, glistening axe upon my bosom. It was hope that prompted the nerve to quiver, the frame to shrink. It was hope, the hope that triumphs on the rack, that whispers to the death, condemned even in the dungeons of the Inquisition. I saw that some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe, and with this observation there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen, collected calmness of despair. For the first time during many hours, or perhaps days, I thought It now occurred to me that the bandage or surcingle which enveloped me was unique. I was tied by no separate cord. I'm letting that roll. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent athwart my... Fuck. I thought I had it, but I didn't. And as a result, I have to read this again. Oh my god, dudes, I'm so fucked. I'm just reading now. I have work to do tomorrow, so I'm just reading. And I'm fucked enough anyway. This is gonna be as hilarious as it's gonna get. Get. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent athwart any portion of the band would so detach it that it might be unwound from my person by means of my left hand. But how fearful, in that case, the proximity of the steel, the result of the slightest struggle, how deadly. Was it likely, moreover, that the minions of the torturer had not foreseen and provided for this possibility? Was it possible that the bandage crossed my bosom in the track of the pendulum? Dreading to find my faint, and, as it seemed, in last hope, frustrated, I so far elevated my head as to obtain a distinct view of my breast. The surcingle enveloped my limbs and body close in all directions, save in the path of the destroying crescent. Scarcely had I dropped my head back into its original position when there flashed upon my mind what I cannot better describe than as the unformed half of that idea of deliverance to which I have previously alluded, and of which moiety only floated indiscriminately through my brain when I raised food to my burning lips. The whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once with a nervous energy of despair to attempt its execution. For many hours the immediate vicinity of the low framework upon which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring at me as if they waited but for motionlessness from my part to make them the... They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if they waited but for motionless to They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if they waited but for motionlessness upon my part to make me their prey. To what food, I thought, have they been accustomed in the well? They had devoured, in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but a small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into an habitual seesaw or wave of the hand about the platter, and at length the conscious uniformity of the movements deprived it of effect. In their voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their Tiffany, the words are super fucking blurry. I'm looking at like 3 lines at a time, and this is the worst. But I am determined to finish this story, and so I shall. In their voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs in my fingers. With the particles of the oily and spicy viand which now remained, I thoroughly rubbed the bandage whenever I could reach it. Then, raising my hand from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. At first, the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change, at the cessation of movement. They shrank alarmedly back. Many sought the well, but this was only for a moment. I had not counted in vain upon their voracity. Observing that I remained without motion, 1 or 2 of the boldest leaped upon the framework and smelt at the surcingle. Surcingle? That's a word I have to say? Observing that, I'm not even drinking anymore. I'm sorry. I'm just fucking blasted and I'm doomed for tomorrow. So I'm just going to continue reading this in a drunken state and you can just deal with it. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leaped upon the framework and smelt at the surcingle. This seemed the signal for a general rush. Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood, they overran it, and leaped in hundreds upon my person. The measured movement of the pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed. They swarmed upon me in ever-accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat. Their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging pressure. Disgust, for which the world has no name, swelled my bosom and chilled with a heavy clamminess my heart. Yet 1 minute, and I felt that the struggle would be over. Plainly, I perceived the loosening of the bandage. I knew that in more than one place it must be already severed. With a more than human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred in my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. I at length felt that I was free. The surcingle hung in ribands from my body, but the stroke of the pendulum already pressed upon my bosom. It had divided the serge of the robe. It had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of escape had arrived. At a wave of my hand, my deliverers hurried tumultuously away. With a steady movement, cautious, sidelong, shrinking, and slow, I slid from the embrace of the bandage and beyond the reach of the scimitar. For the moment, at least, I was free. Free, and in the grasp of the Inquisition. I had scarcely stepped from my wooden bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison when the motion of the hellish machine ceased, and I beheld it drawn up by some invisible force through the ceiling. This was a lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free? I had but escaped death in one form of agony, to be delivered into worse than death in some other. With that thought, I rolled my eyes nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual, some change which at first I could not appreciate distinctly, it was obvious, had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes of a dreary and trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period, I became aware for the first time of the origin of the sulphurous light which illumined the cell. It proceeded from a fissure about half an inch in width, extending entirely around the prison at the base of the walls, which thus appeared and were completely separated from the floor. I endeavored, but of course in vain, to look through the aperture. As I arose from the attempt, the mystery of the alteration in the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I have observed that, although the outlines of the figures upon the walls were sufficiently distinct, yet the colors seemed blurred and indefinite. These colors had now assumed and were momentarily assuming a startling and most intense brilliancy that gave to the spectral and fiendish portraitures an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves than my own. Demon eyes of a wild and ghastly vivacity glared upon me in 1,000 directions, where none had been visible before, and gleamed with the lurid luster of a fire that I could not force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal. Even while I breathed, there came to my nostrils the breath of the vapor of heated iron. A suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deeper glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the pictured horrors of blood. I panted. I gasped for breath. There could be no doubt of the design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting, oh, most demonic of men, I shrank from the glowing metal of the center of the cell. Fuck, it's to the center of the cell. I can only read with one eye. I shrank from the glowing metal to the center of the cell. Amid the thought of the fiery destruction that impended, the idea of the coolness of the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to its deadly brink. I threw my straining vision below. The glare from the unkindled enkindled, kindled, or kindled. Does anybody have a Kindle? I can't even drink anymore. I'm really humped. I really am done. Enkindled. The glare from the enkindled roof illumined its innermost recesses. Yet, for a wild moment, did my spirit refuse to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length, it wrestled its way into my soul. It burned itself upon my shuddering reason. Oh, for a voice to speak. Oh, horror. Oh, any horror but this. With a shriek, I rushed from the margin and buried my face in my hands, weeping bitterly. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked up, shuddering as with a fit of the ague. There had been a second change in the cell, and now the change was obviously in the form. As before, it was in vain that I, at first, endeavored to appreciate or understand what was taking place. But not long was I left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the King of Terrors. The room had been square. I saw that two of its iron angles were now acute, two consequently obtuse. The fearful difference quickly increased with a low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant the apartment had shifted its form into that of a lozenge. But the alteration stopped not there. I neither hoped nor desired it to stop. I could have clasped the red walls to my bosom as a garment of eternal peace. Death, I said, any death but that of the pit. Fool. Might I have not known that into the pit it was the object of the burning iron to urge me? Could I resist its glow? Or, if even that, could I withstand its pressure? And now, flatter and flatter grew the lozenge, with a rapidity that left me no time for consumption. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. It shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me relentlessly. Relentlessly? Resistlessly? Resistlessly is a word. Fuck you, Edgar Allan Poe. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me resistlessly onward. At length, from my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. That's just a bad read. I'm going to do it over. At length, from my seared and writhing body... At length, from my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tottered upon the brink. I averted my eyes. There was a discordant hum of human voices. There was a loud blast as of many trumpets. There was a harsh grating as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell, fainting into the abyss. It was General LaSalle? 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 Who the fuck is General LaSalle? It was that of General LaSalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. Oh my God, we finished that goddamn story. Jesus Christ. I can't believe 8 people are actually still watching this. We made it through, and I want to die. I need so much water. I'm going to eat corn chips until I explode. That is what is going to happen. Thank you, St. Jeff. Thank you, St. Jeff. Thank you all. I don't even know how many things we read, but actually it was pretty cool up until the pit and the pendulum, because fuck the pit, and the pendulum. The pen and the pendulum. The pit and the pendulum, because Edgar Allan Poe, you didn't know what the fuck you were talking about. Any wow? Yes, Chad Gabbard. Fucking handfuls of shredded cheese. I'm gonna eat all of them. Oh, Franchina, the Mountains of Madness. That's a good idea, but I don't think that's, like, royalty-free. I don't think I can, like, do that. Yeah, Chris, Monkey's Paw was the beginning of the end. I should start with the Monkey's Paw, where I know what the fuck is going on. Also, if anybody watching has a fantastic short story that has a beginning and the end that they want read that makes sense to human beings, send it my way, and we will do that another time when I'm not hungover. Love y'all. Sleep well. I'm going to hit the stop streaming button. Have a good night.